Hello, I'm Mike and today I'm introducing Nashi, Illusion Gadgeteer. He's a legendary creature, red rogue, for 1 black, green and blue. He's a 4/4 with menace and ward 2. And most importantly, when he enters the battlefield, you secretly choose a card in your graveyard and conjure a duplicate of it into your hand. Then if it's not a land, it perpetually gains flesh. Nashi is great value just by itself, really. And you can, for example, play him on turn 3 with a Dark Ritual. Then you cast Nashi, have mana left over, and you immediately get the Dark Ritual back into your hand. And you have the other copy in your graveyard, which is also important. Or you can crack Mikulas Bauble to draw a card later. Cast Nashi, get a copy of the Bauble back into your hand. Crack that again. You draw 2 cards. This incremental value is great, but to truly squeeze everything out of Nashi, you want to flicker him, aka temporarily remove him from the battlefield and return him, triggering the enters the battlefield trigger again. I play a few flicker spells, Essence Flux, Teferi's Time Twist, there's a few others, but the most important card in the 99 is by far Displacer Kitten. Kitten's a 2/2 for 3 and a blue with whenever you cast a non-creature spell, exile up to 1 target non-land permanent you control, and then return that to the battlefield under its owner's control. And this allows us to flicker Nashi repeatedly. With Nashi and Displacer Kitten on the battlefield, we can draw our deck with Mikulas Bauble, we can get infinite black mana with Dark Ritual, or if you have Mox Ember in the graveyard, we can get infinite colored mana. And from there on, we should be able to get to a win by either destroying or bouncing or countering everything our opponents have and attacking with Nashi. We can take infinite turns with Time Warp. As a fallback to Kitten, I also play Tassa Deep Dwelling, which is an indestructible enchantment that flickers a creature on our end step. And if we flicker Nashi and get the extra turn spell back, we can cast it at instant speed. Alright, that's it for the intro. Now let's get to the gameplay. Opponent goes first. We only have green and blue sources and we don't have any ramp, so we mulligan. This hand looks better. We have all 3 colors of mana. We have a ramp. Howling Ritual is not gonna do much, but Tassa is amazing, so we definitely keep this. Bounce spell is also great to see. We play the fetch land here, wait for opponent to do their stuff, and we crack for a survey land. We are holding the Tormod's Crypt, and we want to keep the 0 mana spell in our hand in case we get to Displacer Kitten so that we get the trigger. Fortunately, our opponent got a card back from the graveyard, so maybe we should have played the Crypt, but here we just grab the surveil land and move on. We get a free card in the gaze from the graveyard with flashback. Flashing it back is not the best because then we can get it back with Nashi, but still it's great value. Always better to have the card in the graveyard. And because we saw our opponent do stuff with the graveyard, we played the Tormod's Crypt, just in case we need to stop their shenanigans. They play a Mana Dork, which is great for us, we know we can bounce it. Here we have the choice of playing Nashi, but we don't really have much in our graveyard. So I make the choice to bounce their Mana Dork, fill our graveyard, and then see how things go. We get a Bauble and a fetch land, as well as the winds in our graveyard. So next turn when we play Nashi, we get to choose from good stuff. Opponent plays the Mana Dork again, which is great for us. Means that they are not developing their board in any meaningful way, and if we really wanted to, we could bounce the Mana Dork again. But at this point, we are probably not too worried. We get a land, which is lovely to see, meaning that we don't have to get a land from the from our graveyard. and instead we can get something else. We are exiling from the opponent's graveyard because they are going to do stuff with it, and we want to keep our graveyard intact so that we can copy cards with Nashi. Here we can just grab the bauble and draw an extra card. We don't have a land for next turn, so we grab that instead, ensuring that we are getting our land drops in. That gives our opponent a window to cast either Gonte or whatever big drop they have. They go for Ura, which is an interesting choice. They do have mana open, so if they want to recast, we want to prevent that. Luckily they go for a different spell, so we immediately crack the crypt to exile Ura. And they get their creature, but we are not too worried. Opponent foretold here. We can just cast Tessa, get our value with Nashi, or we can hold up our other spells. I chose to cast Tessa and flicker Nashi, getting back a bauble. We are not really too worried about opponent's creatures at this point, and we didn't have a need for the extra bounce spell because we are already holding the Cyclonic Rift. So we just bounce Nashi and pass the opponent. Draw another land. Not the most impactful thing, but it's fine. We are getting enough value from Nashi and Tessa that we are not too worried about subpar draws. Opponents very carefully tapping mana. They are holding up 2 mana for the ward, but they go for the mana dork that they placed the bounty counter on. And we don't necessarily want to use the rift yet. We are not too worried. We can just pass here. We tapped the door for 2 blue so that we can surveil from the flashback gaze. Here, if our opponent attacks, that's fine. It has that touch, but other than that, well, Tiny Bones is unpleasant because we are working with our graveyard and we definitely don't want them to be interfering. We saw 2 lands and a ramp spell. We don't want any of that, so we bin that and we draw a Brawl. Brawl is okay, doesn't necessarily do anything on this board. We can be holding up Rift, or we can play our spells. Opponent's not too scary, and we don't want to be hit with Tiny Bones. Unfortunately, we get mana drained here, so we don't really have a great blocker for the pickpocket. We would have to be either blocking with that Right Shaman, or we can play out something else. So we just dump our hand and pass to the opponent here. Attacking into the 2 death touch creatures is not great, so we will not pursue the damage, and instead we just flicker and get back maybe a bounce spell. We have the Baby Rift, so probably unnecessary. We could get an extra card, but we can also get the Brawl back, and now it has flash, and we have the mana to cast it. So Brawl it is. Opponent targets the Taxidermist, gets 2 mana from their mana drain, and now we are in an interesting spot. We can bounce one of their creatures, so let's see how this goes. Ooh, opponent wants to take an extra turn. We unfortunately don't have a counter spell. But this means that they will be able to play their commander next turn. Let's see. Oh, this turn, right. Well, their commander triggers on at least one creature, not for every creature. So we definitely don't want them to be able to cast stuff from our graveyard. So we block the tiny opponents. And before we lose the opportunity to do so, we use the mana from Shaman to bounce their commander. This deprives them of the trigger and they get 1 damage in. And goes another turn. Their hand is almost empty, so I would expect them to recast the commander, and then they have 2 flying creatures, so they're almost certainly getting the trigger. There they go. Alright, Gonte is in, and everything's attacking. We cannot block in the air, so there's no point blocking the land creature either. And let's see what our opponent does here. They get a card from our library, and it is never mind. Opponent decides to play Atrata instead. That doesn't really impact us in any meaningful way. We draw yet another land and consider Culling Ritual. It would get rid of the Bane as well as the tokens, but also our Taxidermist. We don't have a good use for the mana, so Culling Ritual not really doing much in this situation. We could be tapping our opponent's creatures on their turn. That also doesn't seem particularly useful. And we don't want to be attacking into the Death Toucher. So here we probably want to pass, flick a Nashi, and get something nice from their graveyard, from our graveyard into our hand. We have the Cyclonic Rift in there. And we can cast it, which is definitely an interesting choice. Let's see what our opponent does here. Ooh, they found our Displacer Kitten. Well, that means that we don't have it anymore. But because it is owned by us, we can bounce it with the Cyclonic Rift and get it back to our hand. Unfortunately, we know that opponent has a counter spell in their hand, so if we overload the Cyclonic Rift, they will just counter it and we will not have any mana left. So here we make the choice to cast a Baby Rift, bouncing opponent's commander, preventing the 5 damage and the trigger as well, and we will take 4. We'll take 4 damage, which doesn't really matter to us at all. Yeah, opponent of course decides to counter the Baby Rift. They get a trigger from Displacer Kitten, but that doesn't really do much. And we have enough to cast Brawl. We could block here to prevent the 5 damage, but do we care? Not really. We are still at 16. If opponent deals 9 damage to us, that's fine. So we decide to go to 7. And our game plan is on our end step to get yet another Cyclonic Rift and then instant speed bounce everything our opponent has. some of it into our hand. They get the face down card as well as our Displacer Kitten. They decide to copy their commander. That doesn't really impact our plan. They get a Displacer Kitten trigger. They get their Deathmatcher untapped, which is fine. So here, our opponent has no cards in their hand. We are feeling pretty comfortable. And they flip our Lanovar Lone Speaker. That's fine. We could consider calling Ritual again, but it doesn't really do anything good for us. So we just get the Cyclonic Rift and get ready to cast it next turn. There is a case to be made for casting the Rift now, before our opponent gets the opportunity to draw a card. But we didn't, so let's see how this goes. What is our opponent? Oh, our opponent found a Mnemonic Betrayal. Well, that's certainly interesting, right? Because they get to play out our graveyard, and then when we bounce it, we get it back to our hand. So we don't really want to respond to this. If we side Rift now, they would just play out the rest and we wouldn't get it, so we wait. We hold our Cyclonic Rift and wait for our opponent to cast our cards from the exile zone. There's a few 0-drops that they will happily cast and crack, so we are not getting those back. So our opponent is getting cards from the baubles. They can't really utilize the Displacer Kitten meaningfully. Maybe our opponent should be attacking first and then untapping their stuff with the Displacer Kitten, but they choose not to. And they are kind of playing into the Rift with this, even though they are getting the cards and everything from Mikulas Bauble. Oh. Yeah, there's the baubles. Opponent untaps their Mana Dark, gets the bauble on the battlefield. We are hoping that our opponent plays out everything. They bounce Tassa, which we don't love to see, but it does fill our graveyard, which will probably not last long because our opponent has the Crypt. And of course we are still holding the Cyclonic Rift. Still waiting. Our opponent goes for the information, decides to look at their library. Presumably the other one will be cracked for our... Yes. Yes, it is. So next upkeep, our opponent gets 2 cards. That's fine. We are still planning on getting everything that we own that they just played into our hand. That includes the Displacer Kitten, Lone Speaker, as well as the Crypt, which we can safely assume they will crack in response to the Rift. That's also the reason why we are keeping our fetch land as it is, just in case we need to fill the graveyard later. Opponent decides not to cast anything else. We Cyclonic Rift them, get critted in response, and Cyclonic Rift resolves. Yeah. Alright then, we get Brawl, Displacer Kitten, and Lanovar Lone Speaker back into our hand. They are probably looking to cast a Mana Dork so that they can rebuild next turn. Yep. They get a Weaver, which good for them. Deathrite Shaman, interesting. We don't need the Pact of Negation. Opponent is all tapped out, so we are not really too worried. And we are planning on casting Displacer Kitten and then go. Alright, we play the Displacer Kitten, cast a non-creature spell, Displacer Kitten triggers, we get an extra card from our graveyard. We cannot cast the full Rift, but if we grab it here, we are pretty comfortable. We could be playing it safer and get it back, but also we are not too worried about our opponent. They seem to be playing creatures that are great value but doesn't impact us that much. So we Rift, get another Rift back into our hand. And pass to the opponent. That doesn't currently impact the board in any way whatsoever, so we are thrilled to see that. Neither does this guy. And Arcane Signet is... Now the Weaver is still ours, so we decide to bounce it here, get a trigger of Displacer Kitten, and get back another spell. Here we know that if we untap we can cast the full Rift, so we do just that. Get another Rift into our hand, as well as our Weaver. And we could bounce something else there, but we don't necessarily want to tap out fully in case our opponent is holding a meaningful spell. We have enough mana to cast Tassa. But since our opponent is having trouble developing their board, we just Baby Rift. We bounce the mana rock to get an extra mana here. Opponent decides to wash away our Cyclonic Rift, which is okay, we don't mind that. We still have enough mana open to cast an instant bounce, or rather flicker Nashi and get it back, or get a copy of it back anyway. We are attacking here in hope that opponent blocks, and they did seem to forget that we have Menace on Nashi, so if they did block we would Malakir Birth, getting yet another trigger once it would return to the battlefield. But they decide to take the damage, which is also fine by us. And instead Tassa provides us with an extra Cyclonic Rift. We are at 6 life, we have 6 mana open. Thanks to Brawl we can cast full Rift. Let's see how our opponent handles that. They decide to attack, we are at 6, so we are taking no chances here. We get a regular island and Rift the opponent. Kitten gives us an extra Cyclonic Rift, which we can now cast every turn. And that is good enough for our opponent.